Hello, hello, everybody. All right, it's so good to see you all. I know you're still popping on, so I'm going to give everybody just a chance to get connected. Sometimes it takes a minute, and we don't want you to miss anything, so I'll give you a chance. I see people getting connected, there are videos starting to pop up, so it's good to have you. Happy Monday. I'm really excited to have you today for our Lunch with Docs. My name is Anissa Mitchell with PMD Alliance. We're going to be talking about vitamins and minerals and nutrition and how this is important and what role it actually plays in Parkinson's. And so before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. If you would, first of all, go ahead and pop open your chat box. We have a lot of people joining today, so we want to have you, first of all, pop open that chat box, give us a shout out, let us know where you're joining us from. Thanks, Ken. He's already started this off with his shout out from rural Oregon. Good to see you. Love to see where everyone's joining us from, and that's where your questions are going to come in today. So we want you to ask your questions. I'm sure you have them. And I know that Dr. Mari wants to hear from you as well. So I'm going to invite you. And then once he gets through his presentation, we'll get to those questions. So I'm not going to spend too much time chatting here. I do want to introduce our speaker today. So with us today is Dr. Zoltan Mari, who is the Ruvo Family Chair and Director of the Parkinson's Disease and Movement Disorders Program at the Cleveland Clinic at Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health in Las Vegas. And I know this is an area that he is very interested in doing some research in. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to say. And so I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Mari and let him get started. Thank you, Dr. Mari, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Anissa, and the PMD Alliance for the invitation. It is always a pleasure to speak to you.
Hold on one second, Dr. Mari, you got accidentally muted. I think I muted you as I meant to mute myself. So I think Julie can fix that. Julie, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good to go now.
Okay, sorry about that little glitch. And I just said that I wanted to thank you, Anissa, and the PMD Alliance for letting me speak and inviting me. I always enjoy talking to this group. It's always a very enthusiastic, very inquisitive and interested group. And for that reason, I don't want to talk too much as opposed to leaving time for your questions. And we can hopefully cover as many of them as possible. While the talk is on supplements, nutrition, vitamins, and lifestyle, I would probably have to replace the lifestyle with minerals or something related to supplementation and nutrition, because that is the main topic we are going to talk about. Lifestyle, including exercise, is almost it's related, but it's almost like an entire new topic that I didn't fully cover. Additional disclosures that I would like to share are shown in this slide, and I do receive grants from various entities, foundations, organizations, and the government, which are received as part of the Cleveland Clinic. I also serve as in various roles, including shareholder and consultant. The one thing I definitely need to point out so that you understand that I am conflicted in this matter. As Anissa mentioned, I am doing some research, and that's very important to me. And part of that research is supported by Neuroreserve, which is one company, a for-profit company in the business of supplements, and I will have to disclose that I am a paid consultant for them. I'm not going to advertise their product as opposed to any other products. There are many actual off-the-shelf products you can find on Amazon and elsewhere, but I just wanted to make sure that I made that disclosure, and all the other disclosures are shown in this slide. So by way of introduction, I would like to start when we ask questions as to does something make a difference? It is a very difficult question, because there are so many variables and potential misunderstandings and poorly defined aspects of it. And my next slide will go a little bit more detail of it. But when you ask that question, obviously you want to get better. You want to stay better. You want to make a difference in your quality of life or the future of your disease. But those questions can vary greatly from one person to another, depending on the set of symptoms and disabilities they have, the stage of their disease, the type of their disease. What's important to a person varies on such a great scale, even outside of supplements and nutrition. I experience in my work of treating patients with Parkinson's disease on a daily basis that the same amount of dyskinesia, for instance, may be unnoticed by a patient, and that surprises the family or the trainees that are in clinic with me. Whereas in another patient, the same amount of dyskinesia, or you could call it tremor or whatever symptom it is, may be the worst thing that they can experience in life. And these personal preferences and priorities can create a context as to what's important to you. So when you ask, and there are more than 100 of you on this call, will it make a difference for me? You frame that internally to the things that matter to you, and it may not be something else for another person. I will get to the individualization and the customization of anything and everything we do in medicine, including supplements, in how we can take that into account. But before you even think about supplements, this question as to what is it that you want to make a difference in, and what kind of difference is it a big or small that matters? And they sometimes say that the devil is in the details, and in this case it certainly is. And I don't want to confuse anyone with making this vague, sort of wishy-washy statement about, well, we don't even know what the question is. But it is important to pin down what your goals are, where it is that you are looking to make a difference. And one example that I put on this slide is creatine. Creatine is a supplement. It helps oxidative metabolism, helps our mitochondria make ATP, which is the energy blocks of every living cell, a little bit more easily, and therefore reducing oxidative stress. And it was hoped that it would make a difference in disease progression. It is a supplement just like a vitamin, and there was a huge study. It's called NetPD-LS1, which was the largest clinical trial ever done in Parkinson's disease, with over 1,740 participants, and it was supposed to run for 5 years with more than 50 sites, over a $50 million initial budget. So it's a huge clinical trial. The endpoint was whether we can identify a slowing of how the UPDRS, which is the primary endpoint of the study, the Unified Parkinson Disease Rating Scale that quantifies the degree of motor Parkinsonism, is different between patients who were randomized to take creatine versus patients who were given placebo, and the study failed. It did not meet endpoint, and therefore we can say that for that particular group of patients that were enrolled in this study, and we can talk about the disease type and stage and other criteria that were set up for qualifying for the study, because that's quite questionable. But the bottom line is that for the group of patients who were diagnosed on the basis of meeting clinical diagnostic criteria for Parkinson's disease, it did not work. Well, that's upsetting, and of course, all that money that was spent on this and the killed hopes. But at the same time, creatine is still a very valuable supplement that supports muscle health. It definitely makes muscle health improved, and we believe that the loss of muscle mass, which is very, very important to Parkinson's disease, degrades the whole body's metabolism, and our best tissue in terms of the whole body's metabolism is muscle. And so losing muscle mass is the worst thing that can happen. Well, creatine can counter that to some extent, especially if properly paired with exercise and other activities. comorbidities. So while it did not actually show an effect on slowing down the progression of Parkinson's disease itself, as measured by the UPDRS scores longitudinally, it is still a very helpful supplement. The same is true for many dietary supplements that will improve digestion. Very likely that they are not neuroprotective. Being neuroprotective and disease modifying is obviously our ultimate goal or holy grail that we hope from supplements. And so far, none of them seem to be accomplishing that quite yet. Having said that, A, they have not been maybe properly studied, and B, there are many different areas where we know they work, so they do make a difference, except where they make a difference could be another question and an important one. So the other point here that it's kind of speaking to lifestyle, which I mentioned we're not going to talk a whole lot today about, but nevertheless, when many, and it's not everyone, but many patients feel like almost like a Zen, a Kaizen, or whatever higher order mental, emotional identity and experience by plugging into a lifestyle, which could include supplements, which can include group or other activities. And this sense of identity can help them feel a lot better about themselves. It could help with emotional health, and it indirectly can help their motor functions and how they fare with the disease, how they handle the disease. And in that regard, it definitely makes a difference. And sometimes when I make this point, I hear dismissive comments like, "Oh, you're just talking about placebo effect." And well, I'm not just talking about placebo effect, or rather, placebo effect, it is not just something. Placebo effect can be extremely powerful, and there are many scientific studies that are trying to decipher as to what is it that actually is behind placebo effect. Because placebo effect is not just like, okay, well, you imagine something and then it will work. Well, it will work. And it comes down to this whole notion of mind and body connections that we do not understand perfectly well yet. And especially in Parkinson's disease patient groups, there appear to be a subgroup, which is the high placebo responder group. On the one hand, it can throw off clinical trials, because if somebody has a physiologically measurable large clinical effect to placebo, obviously the active treatment will have to sort of overperform some very high bar, and that it makes very hard for from statistical standpoint to reach that high bar, and therefore it could lead to some studies being negative, whereas it is a very effective treatment. So that high placebo response that we're seeing in Parkinson's disease creates an enormous difficulty for our clinical trial designs. But that's just one problem we clinical trialists will have to deal with. On the other hand, just think about the potential of this as to, if we understood this, how exactly this works, and again, it's not everyone in which this mechanism seems to exist, but if we can make a good use of it, we could make a difference, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And when we talk about lifestyle and plugging into and being part of the supplements taking and other healthy practices, this actually also triggers the same networks and the same mechanisms that is believed to be part of the high placebo response. Moving forward, I just wanted to point out that in these three areas, as far as I can think of about breaking it down, there are some practical needs which may or may not be as I said, disease modifying or neuroprotective effect, which we all hope that one day we will, but we don't even have traditional medications, let alone supplements that can do that today. But I mentioned GI symptoms. I mentioned muscle health. I mentioned good nutrition. So those things are helpful anyway. Even if you don't have Parkinson's disease, you want to have an aging process that is as healthy as possible, and maintaining muscle health and lifestyle and eating well and having a good microbiota in your colons and all those areas of supplementation will be very helpful and relevant and directly or indirectly helping your symptoms. Now, some of you may have gastroparesis. Certainly, many of you have constipation. All the supplements that are aiming to help those are clearly making a difference. So to the original question of the title, whether supplements can make a difference, the answer is yes. And this is one reason why it's yes. Now, I also mentioned earlier that the neuroprotection is the holy grail. Where we stand with that, again, I mentioned the creatine trial, which is one of the few properly managed, controlled, placebo-controlled and randomized high-quality clinical trials that have been done to test the efficacy of supplements for a neuroprotection or disease modification. We don't have a whole lot of those, and part of the reason why we don't is because the way that clinical trials are financed, it all comes down to the money. And when we think about supplements, there is really no way to make a whole lot of money in supplements like drug companies can make money out of rolling out a new drug. Therefore, the only mechanism to fund proper research and clinical trials in the area of supplements, vitamins, minerals, and nutrients is through the federal government, who has the capacity. The NIH funded both the two largest supplement-related clinical trials. One was the NetPDLS1 that I mentioned. The other one was the QE3, which was a phase 3 clinical trial to test the efficacy of coenzyme Q10 for the slowing effect on Parkinson progression, which unfortunately failed too. But everything else failed also. But in order to test supplements in the scale it's necessary, it's not likely that happened very often, especially after those two previous failures. But there is hope, and there's promising research. One, I would say, promising area in research is that we are developing better ways of testing the disease modification effect. We have better outcome measures now, and more are coming. The digital outcome measures area is freshly born and is developing by leaps and bounds, and making their way into proper clinical trials. But also, I would say that we are understanding much more about how patients are just not clones of each other that work the same way. And I will show a slide later where I make a case for having multi-component mixes of nutrients, because you cannot know where you fall or how you are classified from the molecular standpoint. And to the notion of the failed NetPD study, perhaps creatine is actually disease modifying and progression slowing in a subset of patients, which we didn't have enough molecular knowledge to know and identify. All of these studies, including the NetPDLS1, the QE3, but the many dozens and dozens of actual pharmaceutical disease-modifying trials are ongoing at the moment, and all of them define their study population based on meeting the clinical diagnostic criteria, which I believe is a mistake. And there are steps that are currently currently being done to correct that, to identify subsets of Parkinson patients based on certain genetic signatures, having a genetic mutation, for instance, or other biomarkers, molecular biomarkers, receptor subtypes, and other ways to narrow it down so that we know that a subpopulation may have something abnormal, a defect that is important in why they develop Parkinson's disease, and such defect is somewhat connected from the scientific understanding at the molecular level to the supplement or the particular intervention that we think can maybe correct or modify that deficit to the effect of slowing down the progression. And so that's kind of the idea behind neuroprotection. And certainly there is plenty of basic science, preclinical science in non-human models, such as experimental animals or cellular models, where many of the supplements that I will show you today have been shown to be helpful in some molecular ways that are suspected to also play a role in some Parkinson patients' pathophysiology, or we call it etiopathogenesis. I know it's a long word, but that describes our developing understanding what actually is starting the process of Parkinson's disease, which ultimately leads to the brain cells and other cells dying and the whole pathology developing into causing symptoms. So there is a sort of an underlying cause that plays into that. And so that underlying cause is being studied in billions and tens of billions of dollars worth of preclinical science. And in these preclinical models, there is plenty of evidence that many of these components that we can find in today's supplements have done something good. Now, how that translates to people is the million-dollar question, or I would say trillion-dollar question at this point, if you consider how much money has been invested in preclinical research over the past 3 decades. But it hasn't translated yet, but I think we are close to the point where it could. And for now, taking more supplements and covering the basis in more ways and having them come in mixtures is probably our best way to make sure that even if you are in one subset or subpopulation where one of the many different ingredients could make a difference, if you take several, you increase your chances that you are hitting that. Having said that, I also don't want to over promise and oversell the idea of slowing down disease progression at any stage of the disease, because some of those molecular mechanisms could be playing out at a stage of Parkinson's disease that you are already past. In other words, sometimes the horse is out of the barn analogy is used. Some of these cascade of molecular events could come to a point where we cannot put the genie back into the bottle. But of course, again, the devil is in the details. Every case is different. And I do believe that there are some ways to intervene and slow down progression, even at a later stage. Of course, it's not going to be restorative, so you're not going to gain back and turn the time back. First, we would have to reverse normal aging if we were to do that, but at least we hope to slow and halt the progression that's undertaking throughout the entire course of Parkinson's disease. So I mentioned that we don't have a whole lot of clinical evidence, meaning evidence that is obtained in high quality clinical trials in actual patients. And the QE3 and the creatine studies are mentioned here. But again, there is hope. Number one, some of these things must work, right? But seriously, as I said, we will learn enough of how to do clinical trials much more efficiently. So you don't have to blow $50 million plus to test one substance to know if it works. We should focus on much smaller trials that are somewhat shorter, but more specific in a subset of patients which have certain abnormalities that actually connect scientifically to the actual nutrients or intervention. So with that, some of the commonly mentioned specific examples are on this slide, and everybody knows about niacin, which is listed as first of all with a reason. I think that is probably the closest one to support neural health. Similarly to how creatine does it, it speaks to helping the mitochondrial energy generation. Many other B vitamins are also listed here. It's unlikely that every one of them are equally helpful to everybody, but certainly there is very little harm in taking B vitamin supplementation. It's water-soluble vitamin, and excess is lost with urine, just like with vitamin C. It's very hard to imagine overdosing. I mean, it's not good to take anything far greater than the recommended range, but certainly it's probably safe. But there is such a thing as vitamin B toxicity, just so don't overdo it. But it's a big range. Vitamin D, on the other hand, you could actually overdose because it's a fat soluble vitamin. But we have found in later years that the vitamin D deficiency is far more prevalent among Parkinson patients than the general population, and certainly it's an epidemic. Even in the general population, low vitamin D levels are commonplace, and I know that the CDC is looking to increase the recommended daily dose. It was a recent news that I saw last week. Vitamin E is also an antioxidant, and it oftentimes was mixed in with various disease-modifying efforts. It was in the QE3 trial, for instance, vitamin E supplementation was provided as part of the trial. The omega-3 fats, some benefits are suspected. Again, just like with all of the others, it is important to note that many of the information in terms of their antioxidant efficacy and other benefits are derived from preclinical experiments, and the translation of that to actual clinical benefits is currently not it doesn't have a very strong track record. And by the way, I see some of you are making notes. I believe that this is recorded, and I'm very happy to make all the slides available to you. So we talked about the GI benefits of certain probiotics, and there's very little question about that. And there are some warnings against uncontrolled iron supplementation. And just like with anything else I'm showing you here, and that's on my summary slide as well, make sure that you discuss the plans or how much you're taking with your treating physicians. I'm going to the next slide, and this is the where we are headed, first slide of two, moving from single nutrients to nutrients driven and multi-nutrient solutions. That's kind of the immediate direction right now. As I mentioned earlier, the idea is that we may not know every Parkinson patient at the individual level to the molecular details. And while many of these supplements that I just listed could be helpful to certain sets of patients, there is nothing really to lose to combine several, and there may actually work in synergies, and there is some preclinical evidence for that as well. And here is my sort of disclosure spot. The nutrient you see there is actually the Relevate from NeuroReserve that I work as a consultant for. But again, there are many others that you can find, and you can just look at their ingredients and determine if they are fitting the bill. Now, the other thing that I wanted to emphasize, and is probably even more important, is that as we get to know more about the underpinnings of Parkinson's disease mechanisms and etiopathogenesis at the molecular level, we will increasingly be able to tell you not just take a pill or a supplement, and because we don't know which type you are, just take a supplement that has everything. So from that sort of where we are headed, slide A, we hope to be moving to the where we headed slide B, and that's conceptually different, and I would say better, in a sense that with the understanding of the contributors to your Parkinson's disease pathogenesis at the individual basis and identifying them, we would be able to offer a more a customized and individualized set of measures. There are some patients who could see exercise, for instance, making a tremendous difference in their type of Parkinson's disease, whereas the same amount of exercise would not really make it worthwhile another person to spend all that time. Although maybe I picked the wrong example, because I don't see that exercise wouldn't be very helpful for anyone. But the bottom line is that certain measures, certain interventions, and certain nutrients or treatments may work better for certain individuals than others. And in this idea of precision medicine, which is a futuristic concept, what we are hoping to do is characterize everyone down to the genome, down to the variations in their enzyme types or the receptor components and variability. And based on that knowledge, we would specifically recommend certain treatments, and that is something that is also true for nutrients. So taking vitamin D first of all, vitamin D, you can get your vitamin D level measured, and if it's low, then that's an easy target. But then depending on what your dopamine receptor combination is, or what is your COMT enzyme type, it would be interesting to match your specific molecular characteristics and genomic characteristics to a set of interventions and treatments that best matches your type. And that's kind of the idea of precision medicine. And of course, this needs to be verified and confirmed and studied excessively in the future. But at the same time, I can see how the nutrition industry or supplement industry will take a tremendous boost from what we are doing in trying to develop actual disease modifying or neuroprotective treatments in the traditional pharmacotherapy standpoint. I think the two processes will certainly go along each other, and as you could see, some of the most promising disease modifying candidates were in fact supplements. And right now there are many others, including developing monoclonal antibodies against free-flowing alpha-synuclein, as well as targeting the GLP-1 analog receptor system on the microglia, and many other tyrosine hydroxylases are being targeted. There are at least half dozen, perhaps more, pharmacological targets that are currently being exploited for traditional pharmacotherapy or immunotherapy based disease modification. But along the lines, we will develop a tremendously improved understanding of the molecular underpinning of what causes the progression and the Parkinson disease steps in the beginning, and whether there are certain steps and measures in lifestyle or supplements that can reduce the risk. One interesting area is the so-called prodromal disease. These are individuals who do not have Parkinson's disease, but they have a certain condition that makes it very likely that they will develop Parkinson's disease. One well-known example is anosmia. If somebody develops idiopathic anosmia, the loss of sense of smell, then they have at least a 60 or 70% chance of developing Parkinson's disease in the following 5 years. Similar data are known for RBD, which is REM behavior disorder, as well. Now, just imagine if those patients could be better characterized in terms of their molecular makeup and genotype, and some customized mix of nutrients could be started right away, even if just delaying the onset of their Parkinson's disease by a few years, that could be a tremendous difference with very little actual risk, because most of these supplements are in fact natural and generally harmless. But on that note, I want to repeat what I said earlier, which is every time you make a decision to take something and you are under the care of a Parkinson neurologist or just a general neurologist, please make sure that you bring the plans to their attention so they know what supplements you're taking. These are some of the references, and with that, I'm gonna jump to the summary. And number one, I hope that you agree that supplements and all the minerals, nutrition in general, can make a difference. As I said, we didn't address lifestyle, but there's definitely no question that exercise makes a difference. So that is beyond question at this point. With regards to that, the questions that remain is what kind of exercise, to whom, and how much exercise. But we can talk about that another time. Number two, I would like to emphasize that the science is in development. We don't know everything. We don't have really hardcore evidence in proving the benefits of every supplement that is out there. But we already have quite a lot of information to think that or believe that they can help. In terms of looking for the completeness, I just wanted to make sure that we don't fall into the same situation that's in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in Douglas Adams' book, where a supercomputer called the Deep Thought was thinking 7.5 million years to provide the answer to the life, the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And by the way, if you type that question into Google, this is the screenshot that you're gonna get. It's a little calculator interface with the answer there. So we don't know everything, but I think we know enough that it is important to consider supplements and with the involvement of your provider and with the knowledge that it may or may not help, because we don't have an absolute proof and smoking gun to confirm their benefits. And besides talking to your doctor, it is important to keep in mind that there are all sorts of information sources out there. If you ask Dr. Google, you don't know who's behind. Like, for instance, you know that where I come from, I told you that I first of all, I'm a clinician. My number one interest is helping patients. I'm also on a mission to educate. That's why I'm happy to take on any speaking engagement. But at the same time, I also told you my disclosures, and you can take that into account. When you go on the wide web, it is not always clear where that data comes from or where that information comes from. So always use a grain of salt in evaluating the source. And we actually have, and I should have put that here, a website that we maintain at the Cleveland Clinic Ludovo Center called healthybrains.org. And it's a comprehensive information source where we, the staff, will vet and evaluate information. So we will make sure that it's not overstated and not incorrect. And I'm sure that all the content that you get from the PMD Alliance is also properly reviewed and evaluated by healthcare professionals for accuracy and lack of undue bias. So that was pretty much my plan to start the conversation as an introduction. And I'm going to stop sharing my slides here. But again, you will have access to the content later, both the recording as well as the slides. And therefore, you will get the contents later on. And so now, hopefully, we can turn our attention to some of your questions.
All right, we have quite a few. So I've tried to categorize them a little bit. So I want to first start off with this question about safety. Someone had written in earlier, people who have diabetes are advised not to take too many supplements to protect kidneys. Would that apply here?
Absolutely. Just to say that if you don't have diabetes or kidney problem or any other medical issues, many of these supplements are safe because they really don't represent a traditional pharmacological treatment. At the same time, the devil is in the details, and every case is different. So if you are a Parkinson patient without added comorbidity, chances are most commercially available supplements that carried by Amazon or carried by Costco should be safe. Always read the ingredients. Every single one should provide you with the ingredients. Always read the warnings. They are required to point out in what diseases there should be caution. And finally, as I mentioned during the talk, always run it by your treating physician as well. So there is no such a thing that is good for everybody or even safe for everybody. And that's why you need to take those measures of caution.
So you touched on a question that's come in from a couple of people in terms of how you would know whether a vitamin or a supplement has in it what it says it has in it, since there's not, the FDA doesn't regulate. So first of all, would you be able to speak to where somebody might be able to make sure that what they're getting is actually a pure, or at least it has in it what it says? And then also, do you think the FDA would ever regulate supplements in the future?
These are excellent questions. And it's absolutely right that the fact that supplements have this work around the FDA concerns people, and rightfully so. I think that the current state is probably not going to be maintained forever. It is very hard for me, even though I'm in this business, to monitor people bring to me all sorts of products that I've never seen before from China. And there is a list of ingredients, but some of those things I don't even know. And how do I know it's safe? I generally go around by this problem problem as a provider to advise my own patients to go with reliable brands. We have some reliable ways of checking, like, for instance, I mentioned Amazon. I'm not I'm not paid by Amazon, by the way. I'm not in any way related to them, but they do have a somewhat meaningful feedback system, and I always go with the large numbers. Usually, established makers have maybe a bit of a higher price tag, but they also have a great deal of interest in their own reputation and branding. Um, but you are right. This is still not good enough for many people, and it leaves lots of questions and concerns and uncertainty. And I am 100% in support of the FDA taking on the review of supplements in a way where we don't have to rely on this circumstantial and indirect guessing game, because there's a big deal of that. But we have to have a government authority that would review the ingredients, would chemically analyze them, and subject to makers similar safety protocols and testing as they do for commercial drugs. It is a complex matter because there is not the same amount of money in supplements as they are in kind of traditional drugs. So the question is, who's going to have the money to afford all that safety testing if it's the same rigor as it is for pharma companies who have unlimited amount of money? So there are many questions, and I think the conversation should involve patient advocacy groups, should involve academicians, and there should be some way of, first of all, I think safety is important, but there are also all sorts of claims out there that are not regulated. And I think that is at least as big of a problem, that anyone can state anything without being called out by consumer protection agencies properly. And I just wanted to point out in my slides that none of these supplements, in fact, ever showed clinical evidence of slowing down disease. So at a minimum, if somebody claims that, that is false advertising, and there is not enough done for that. So to sum it up, I think at the moment there is no overwhelming evidence for us to think that the ingredients listed as required by the current existing manufacturing regulations would not be correct. There could be mistakes, but mistakes have happened with actual drugs too. So I don't see there is a widespread, ubiquitous problem with that. Much more likely that they are safe, but they are not really doing as much as they claim, and that is probably more likely to happen. But I think we can all advocate for the Parkinson Foundation, the government, everywhere we can have our voices heard to provide more oversight and more transparency in regulation.
So related to people getting what they actually need, because you mentioned that it's very individualized for each person, obviously. So do you have any thoughts about hair analysis, for minerals? Like, is there any benefit to that? Is that a way that people could see if they're lacking in something that might be beneficial?
It might be. Just for those of you who have not heard of this, analysis of hair would provide a sort of a time capsule in sort of chronic issues. Selaginine deficiency is one thing that it has been used. but just like with every other case, number one, your hair may reflect something that you suffered a couple of years ago, but you're no longer suffering from it. You know, the prevalence of truly metal and mineral deficiencies, or too much of that is so infrequent contributor to Parkinson's disease that I feel like this doesn't really add much as a general measure. Now, if there is a reason to suspect something is not adding up, or somebody was exposed to manganese or whatever special circumstances, that could be used. Another thing that I find some practices use all the time is skin biopsy for studying immunohistochemistry in the sweat gland pseudomotor nerve fibers. I don't agree with that. Many patients who have Parkinson's disease don't have that. This is on the basis that many patients in even I mentioned prodromal states, have such a synucleinopathy present in the skin, but the synucleinopathy, the alteration of the alpha-synuclein molecule, which is very relevant in the pathogenesis of Parkinson's disease, where it starts can vary from patient to another. It can start in the skin, it can start in the gut, it can come through the nose, or it can start in the brain itself. And even if it's present in all those places, it's not always present. There are patients who have Parkinson's disease without a doubt, and they don't have synucleinopathy in the enteric nervous system, for instance. So I don't advocate these non-traditional testing. They usually don't add a whole lot unless it's a research study.
All right, so we have quite a bit of questions regarding certain supplements. So I want to start with CoQ10. Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, so besides creatine, coenzyme Q10 was one of the other supplements that actually was tested in a proper, well-designed, randomized, and controlled clinical trial. The primary endpoint, and it was called QE3, and I was actually a site investigator for both of them while I was still at Hopkins. So the primary endpoint for QE3 was the time to reach the need for Parkinson's symptomatic medications. Patients enrolled had to meet clinical diagnostic criteria for Parkinson's disease, and then they had to be, at the time of enrollment, not needing any Parkinson medications. As the disease progresses, everybody will get to the point where they will need symptomatic treatments. And so the idea was that patients who were randomized on the coenzyme Q10 treatment group would reach that point later than the placebo group. And that would be the proof for slowing down disease progression. Unfortunately, the study did not meet endpoint, and therefore, officially, we can say that in humans with Parkinson's disease, where the enrollment is based on clinical diagnostic criteria, it does not slow down Parkinson's disease progression. Now, there are many caveats there. Number one, is this the best way to study that? Maybe methodologically there was a flaw. Maybe we should have used more patients in each group, or maybe we should have used a different endpoint, variables perhaps. Number two, is it a good idea to enroll all patients who have clinical diagnosis of Parkinson's disease together? Some of them may have had some oxidative metabolism issues that was key to why they had Parkinson's disease, and some of them may not have had that same deficit. And who knows, coenzyme Q10 could have been helpful for the subgroup where there was such problem, but we would not know because we diluted the study by making the cohort every Parkinson's disease patient who meets the diagnostic criteria, clinical diagnostic criteria. So in other words, while it was a negative study, there's quite a bit of a chance that in some patients, it can actually make a difference. we do have, as I mentioned earlier, plenty of preclinical, meaning before humans, tissue, cell preparations, and live animals data why it should work in a variety of Parkinson models. And then in humans, it did not work. Well, um, there are many potential reasons for it, but the bottom line is that at this time, we cannot advocate or advertise or promote coenzyme Q10 as disease modifying. Having said that, who knows, there could be patients with certain types of Parkinson's where in fact it does that. And maybe further studies can be done to identify those patients.
All right. So, gosh, we have a lot of questions. Someone wanted to know about curcumin from turmeric. Is that helpful?
Turmeric?
Yeah, the curcumin from it.
Yes. It's pretty much the same thing as I said about other things. I would say relatively less even preclinically known and shown about that. So I certainly wouldn't advocate that as certainly effective for anything. But I don't see how it can be harmful. So I always say, if you are able to afford supplements, it's probably not a bad idea, assuming that your comorbidities and disease condition otherwise is not a problematic for it. But I'm not aware of a whole lot of preclinical work in this particular examples that's supportive of any kind of benefit.
And in regards to nutrition, someone wanted to know about whether being vegan is helpful. Does that have a positive impact?
Good question. So again, devil is in the details. For every single person, it's different. If you have a heart disease, cardiovascular disease, a heavy family history of heart attacks or strokes, high cholesterol, obviously eating a lot of beef is not going to be helpful to you, and going vegan could be very, very helpful. On the other hand, if you are maybe on the low BMI side of the spectrum, and you're losing muscle, the most vegan diets are not fully representative the entire amino acid repertoire that our body needs, and so it could be maybe not too helpful to you. So it depends on the situation. There are many benefits of eating a Mediterranean diet and sort of avoidance of red meat. But at the same time, some meats, such as fish, could add to the entire amino acid needs of the body, especially if you have a hard time maintaining muscle mass.
Okay. And I know we're running out of time. So I guess I would love to know, one person wanted to know where they might be able to participate in a clinical trial for supplements, because they're very interested in that.
Yes, that's a great question, and I get that question a lot. So at the moment, there are no large-scale, well-designed, randomized, and controlled clinical trials ongoing, such as we had for the creatine and the coenzyme Q10 a few years back. I believe that the NIH and other funding agencies that have the capability of funding such sized supplement studies are taking a bit of a cautious backseat until we know more how to select subsets of patients properly, and rather than because we already know that bringing in everybody who meets the clinical diagnosis may not be the best formula for these clinical trials. So they are holding back a little bit, but they certainly will get back in this arena once we have better outcome measures and once we have better ways of enrolling patients. At the same time, there are many small-scale pilots that are ongoing, and these are partially industry-sponsored. Many of them are observational studies. So every single study that is kosher, that number one, should not make you pay for participation. Number two, it should have an IRB approval and a consent form. And number three, they should be registered with clinicaltrials.gov. And by the way, Michael J. Fox's website, it's called Trial Finder, trialfinder.com. So you can go to the Trial Finder on the Michael J. Fox Foundation website, which is probably easier to navigate than the clinicaltrials.gov, because it's only Parkinson's and it is more user-friendly. But if you use Parkinson's disease and supplement as keywords for the clinicaltrials.gov site, and also use your zip code, it will show if anything is available in your area.
All right, and I know that we are at the top of the hour, but I think this is a good question for an ending. Like, does your website, is there anywhere that someone could go just to get a good list of supplements just in general that they should be considering taking?
All of the major organizations, such as the Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Parkinson's Foundation, the Parkinson's Foundation of the National Capital Area, and many large academic centers maintain a live document or up-to-date information dedicated to supplements, because it's such a common question. We have one, as I mentioned, it's called Healthy Brains, one word, healthybrains.org, which is a comprehensive brain health resource in advising on exercise, lifestyle, diet, supplements, many of these things. It is somewhat limited. It's not a comprehensive list of everything and anything that can help you. That would be too big of a task for any one of us to maintain, but at least we can stand by the recommendations that are made on that website. But again, all the other websites that I mentioned earlier have similar list and advice.
Awesome. And so we put that link as well as the others that he's mentioned in the chat. So if you want to save your chat, that way you can go back to it later. All you have to do is go down to where you write your texts or your chats. And if you look over to the far right, you'll see 3 little dots, and you click on that, that little box will pop up and it'll say save chat. That way you can refer back to those links later that we mentioned. So I want to thank Dr. Mari for giving us all of this great information. And I know we didn't get to all of your great questions. There was just so many good ones. So I guess that we're going to have a part 2 or have an article or some kind of follow-up, because this is such an important topic. And I know that we could probably spend time just speaking on some of those things that you asked that we didn't get to. So thank you, Dr. Mari, so much for joining us today. If everyone would be willing to give him the wave of gratitude for his time and expertise today. This is our PMD style of gratitude, and we thank you so much. And I thank all of you for joining us today, and we will see you again soon. Thanks, Dr. Mari.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you all.